The Silence Breakers, Episode 2, The First Sound. In Episode 1, the words, "I have come," did not fade. They hung in the air like an unspoken challenge, pressing against the walls of the hall, sinking into the polished wooden floor, curling into the folds of every kneeling figure's robe. The silence did not return, not fully. It had been shattered, not loudly, not forcefully, but irreversibly. Yuki knew it. She could see it in the way the air had tightened, in the way the flickering lanterns no longer seemed steady, in the way her own heartbeat had quickened, louder, faster, as if her body understood before her mind did. The communicator had returned, but no one moved, no one looked up. It was not obedience. It was fear. A lifetime of unspoken rules, of careful restraint, or silence so deep it had become a second skin. It was not easy to cast that aside, not even when the impossible had happened. Yuki had thought she would be ready. She was not. Her fingers trembled slightly in her lap, curling into the heavy fabric of her kimono. She had spent years waiting for this moment, praying for this moment. But she had never known that when it came, she might not be brave enough to meet it. Episode 2, The First Sound. The communicator did not speak again. She did not need to. Instead, she moved, one step forward. The sound was nothing, just the gentle shift of fabric, the softest brush of a foot against polished wood. And yet Yuki felt it like a crack splitting the earth beneath her. A single step should not have held so much weight. But it did. Because it was not just a step. It was a declaration. The communicator had not come to stand in the doorway like an outsider. She had not come to beg to be heard. She had stepped forward. And in doing so, she had claimed space that had not been hers for generations. A fracture in the silence. The hall remained still. The kneeling figures did not stir. But something had changed. A presence, a shift, a fracture in the silence. Yuki could feel it, and she knew she was not the only one. It was in the way the lanterns flickered unevenly, as if the room itself had begun to breathe. It was in the way the air no longer felt contained, no longer pressed so heavily against her ribs. It was in the way one of the elders finally turned his head. Not fully, not in defiance, but enough. Enough to see, enough to acknowledge. Yuki's breath caught in her throat. This had never happened before. The elders were the ones who upheld the rules, the ones who ensured no one spoke, no one looked, no one questioned. And yet he had looked. Not for long, just a flicker of a moment, a single glance in the communicator's direction before he dropped his gaze again. But it was enough, because now he knew. Now they all knew. The silence had not only been broken, it had been seen breaking. And there was no unseeing that. The choice. Yuki swallowed, her hands tightening in her lap. This was it. This was the moment she had always known would come, the moment she had dreamt of since she first read the human papers, since she first understood what it meant to have a voice and what it meant to lose it. The moment when everything could change. But only if someone dared to look up. The communicator stood there, waiting, not moving, not speaking, waiting. Not just for acknowledgement, for acceptance. For someone to meet her gaze and claim this moment as real. For the next silence breaker. Yuki's breath became shallow, uneven. She had a choice. She could stay where she was. She could bow her head, as she always had, as they all had, and pretend nothing had happened. Or she could lift her eyes. She could see. She could let herself be seen. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. Once she looked up, she would never be able to go back. Once she saw the communicator, once their eyes met, the silence that had held her entire world together would no longer exist. It would be gone, forever. And Yuki would have to decide who she was in the aftermath. She swallowed hard, and then, slowly, so slowly, she began to lift her gaze. A single flicker of light reflected off the polished floor. A sharp inhale from somewhere in the hall, not Yuki's. A presence pressing closer. The communicator did not move. She only waited. And in that waiting, the weight of an entire nation's silence trembled on the edge of being undone. Episode 3, The Gaze That Breaks the Silence. Coming soon.